And now it's time for a Geek Speak with
GK Technologies,
Sarah and Jody.
In the fields again, I just can't wait to get in the fields again. The life I love is spreading potash for my friends, and I can't wait to get in the fields again. No, I can't wait to get in the fields again.
All right. So today's podcast, we have a really exciting guest on with us. We actually have podcasters themselves. The Agronomists Happy Hour is joining a Geek Speak. Both of these gentlemen, if I can say, Jason Hansen and Kyle Oki, they both use GK technology in very different ways and precision agriculture in different ways in their consulting businesses. And so we're really excited to have them on board with us here today. We've always enjoyed being able to collaborate with you. I know both Jody and I have been on your podcasts in different capacities. So it's really great to have you both here. So thank you. Who are you guys?
So I'll go first. Jason Hansen. I reside up in the Devil's Lake area. I'm independent crop consultant. And yes, I'm co-host of the Agronomist Happy Hour podcast. So we appreciate all our listeners who turn in that debauchery every once a week or so, something like that. And for the most part, I was this week I was down in Fargo for Wide World of Weeds and Southern Water Workshop and some other meetings where we're just trying to get updated, trying to keep ahead for my customers and things for 2024. So I use precision ag in my business, and it's exciting. I like it. I'm kind of new to it as compared to other people, but that's okay. And you can always learn something. And from agronomy standpoint, I think that's great. It's always changing. So I appreciate getting asked to be on this podcast.
Well, that is great. And Kyle, if I can ask, Kyle, who are you?
Well, I guess one, I'm the other half of the Agronomist Happy Hour. So that other co-host that's on there. And I also am an independent crop consultant, but a lot newer in that game versus Jason. So this is just wrapping up my second year of being an independent crop consultant and absolutely love doing it. I use precision agriculture as like almost a cornerstone of what I do. Like it's ingrained in everything I'm doing. So it's so important. And it was very cool because I actually got to use ADMS back before I had my kind of technical agronomy representative kind of portion of my career. And so I got to see where that tool was. And now I've been using it again for 2 years. And it is like mind blowing how much better that tool has gotten. I mean, it's the same awesome functionality, but this whole group, you guys at GK Technologies have really, I mean, I'm seeing what a decade has done to updates in a tool, and it's pretty dang cool. So precision ag is used all the time, and it just doesn't have to be an independent consultant thing. It could be retail. It could be really anything. Research. You could find ways to use it, but I would say those that are working with farmers on site-specific fertilizer are probably the big users, right? And default, that's probably my biggest use, but it goes so many places from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. And Jason, I had the pleasure of seeing you on Tuesday after the Wild World of Weeds workshop and learned that you are celebrating your 30th year of being a certified crop advisor or a CCA. Congratulations on that, by the way. And I'm curious, what's been your relationship with precision agriculture since the beginning to now? Like what big changes have you seen over that 30-year time span?
Yeah, it's the CCA CCA organization celebrating a lot of people in the 90s. So I'm just short. I'm like 29 years. But the first exposure I had to it was we were doing an extremely illustrious job. So fascinating. Everybody wanted to do it. And that was grid sampling 4-footers for sugar beets. And I remember doing a field down by Wilmer, Minnesota, and it took me the whole day, and it was 40 acres. And what you did was
Ufta
you had flag.
Meta.
What's that?
40 acres, a whole day, 4-foot grid sampling. Ufda Meta.
Yeah, because you had the little marker you have with the roller wheel that measures stuff off. Okay, you started on one corner and you rolled that and started marking your places with flags. And then you went the other way and started marking. So it took half the day or more than just to flag your points because we didn't have anything of a platform to go and do this. Okay. So this was not fun at all. Trust me, because it took so long of a time. And that's how things started for me. And then we did very similar things with, but we could do it in blocks, was liming, grid sampling, and lime because it was big alfalfa country. So then when I entered into my career in ag retail, and I'm sure you can visualize it was on so many things, was the soil action. A lot of ag chem Terragators had the soil action box. You could see these, they had the satellite and the colored fields, and there was all these layers. And the intent was that you were going to take all these fields that were non-productive and you were going to bring everything up and even it out, and everything was going to be, from a fertility standpoint, perfect. That's where we started in the 90s.
So let me get this straight. In the 90s, you were really trying to make sure that you were fixing all of the bad spots. You were going to fix all the bad spots and everything was going to go from being, subpar production in some spots to like amazing.
Yeah.
And everyone thought that was going to be achievable.
Yeah, that's what so if you had a field, you have a quarter section and you had anywhere from 3 parts per million up to 12, you were going to make that whole thing at least 12 parts per million. And you didn't, that was kind of the plan. That was what everybody talked about back then. And if you weren't going to jump in on this, you're going to get left behind. And so when people did jump into it, then they started finding out other things that you couldn't. You could adapt or change it a little bit, but you had other factors that were not going to permit you to do that.
So it sounds like there was a lot of excitement about adopting those practices, and you kind of alluded to it, that there were, maybe this assumption of improving everything to the same level wasn't really going to happen. What were the other roadblocks, I guess, to adopting those practices in the 90s?
Well, part of it was just the capacity of what you had for technology. I remember when I was in college, we had 2 people in our fraternity that had a 286 processor. They were the rich kids. Okay. And because they had their own computer, the old IBM PS2. Yeah. Because you would always go to computer clusters on campus, and they were running about the same speed. And by the time I got out of NDSU, there was a couple places on campus. If you could find a 486, man, you thought you were flying. You were on the space shuttle heading to the moon. And they eventually got to a 586 processor. But just what you were trying to do, storage unit. First computer class I took in college, it was on a 5 1/4-inch floppy, and so on and so forth. So now you're transferring that into, you just think of the transfer process and how things have changed from the capability of computers, storing data, transferring data. It was pretty, hook up the oxen to the covered wagon. That's how it started.
So the podcast listeners couldn't see, but I thinking back to like your times of going out with like a measuring wheel to set your grid points, my face is just of absolute shock and disgust, because I think it takes me, like, I have an app and I can set grid points for an acre in 20 seconds, and then I can go out there and get them pretty easy. So that's a huge change from
Huge change.
where we are today.
So, Kyle, your background is actually kind of interesting because your degree is actually in GIS.
It is.
And so that brings a very interesting perspective to this whole agronomy discussion and everything. So, and so how did you go from a GIS degree to getting into agronomy, and how has precision agriculture, how have you seen that in your career grow and change over time?
Boy, I've got a lot to unpack there. So
It gives you
interesting.
lots of latitude. You can take it any direction you want.
So I'll make some parts of this short. So I think my path through like trying to figure out what I was going to do for a career and in college majors and all that are no different than just about any 18, 19-year-old kid. You think maybe you have an idea, or hopefully you have an idea. And even if you don't have an idea, I guarantee your idea changes in like 2-3 months. And that's just how it goes. And so we used to farm. We had a unique farm versus others. I mean, I have all my cousins and uncles and my grandpa were row crop farmers, and they still are. And so a lot of exposure to that end of things. My dad works for a row crop farmer, has for well over 30 years now. But we had a produce farm. So we did 50 acres of produce. And so I've always had that kind of background, although that was, I don't know, there's probably plenty of precision applications you could use in it now, but it, was never in our sight as a precision ag thing. But anyways, there was that background, but then we quit doing that on a main gig thing by the time I got a driver's license. And so then the people I worked for my summer jobs, it was all natural resources. So that's what I went to college for, was natural resources. And it took 2 or 3 months into the curriculum where I was excelling, doing awesome. I was a really good student there because I wasn't a good student in high school. I really enjoyed that stuff. And I realized real fast that I'm going to go in major debt and I'm going to get a job that's probably not going to pay that well. And so I'm sitting there like, I don't know what to do there. And they had this GIS kind of like branch off of this natural resources program. And so I started taking those GIS courses. And then in another semester, I completely switched into just their geography and GIS curriculum at Itasca Community College in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, is where I was doing this. And then by the time I was wrapped up there, and I'm like, this whole precision ag thing really interested me, because now I've gotten to try these, looking at wildland fire modeling to land use planning, city planning, all that, looking at all the applications of GIS. And I remember my grandpa, of all people, saying, why don't you look at, agronomy or agriculture? I was like, we get these young guys come in, they get a cell phone, they get a computer, they get a pickup, and they get paid. And he's like, I'd rather see someone like you come in and try to sell us something and go that route than just seeing all these random people bugging us all the time. And it was kind of like that bop you on this side of the head. Should have had your V8 this morning, kind of thing. So anyways, I transferred to the University of Minnesota Crookston, which I was going to do their precision ag program, but then realized that was more of a ag systems management. So that was more geared towards farmers going back to the farm. And so I just went into straight agronomy, which really suited my needs better. So then I just got my agronomy education there. But in that whole time in between, this gets back to kind of Jason talking about his launch into precision ag in the 90s, was that, this was like 2004, 2005, 2006 for me. And I'm going back to my cousin, my uncle, my grandpa, and talking about these things. And even the guys my dad works for still, they talk about precision ag and they go, yeah, we tried that. Yeah, you know what they wanted us to do? They went and took this really crappy spot in the field, and they're trying to raise the yield to what the rest of the field does, and we spent a lot of money and it didn't work. And so they're like, we don't like this whole variable rate fertilizer thing. We don't think it works. And so that was like a bad experience on their end. And they're just like, this doesn't work. And I don't know if we'll do this. And so that, like, that one farm that I'm referring to, it's in pothole country, just kind of just off like if you can imagine like where the glacial beach is of Lake Agassiz on the Minnesota side. So potholes, sand, gravel, lots of just sand that comes up to the surface. Yep, the beach sand stuff. And so there's really awesome heavy clays, heavy organic matter to just pure blow sand in the same field. So that kind of practice makes absolute sense in that area. But so it made sense for them. And then you switch to like my uncle who farms around Felton, and they've got fields, like whole quarters that are one soil type. And he always laughed and brought it up to me. And I don't know if he ever remembers me saying or him saying this to me, but he goes, we don't have variability. It's all low in fertilizer. We have none. We just have to fertilize all the time.
A little is good, more is better.
Yep. And then a cousin of mine, he's like, the variability is all over the place. But he goes, it's all low though. So we just need to put a bunch of fertilizer on. So anyways, I just remember those being those conversations early on, but everyone was kind of like, yeah, people have tried it, but it doesn't work that great. And so then anyways, I got a job working at a farmer's co-op in Leeds, North Dakota. And I was there for 5 years and pretty much jumped right into the precision ag thing from year one with those guys and working with those farmers. And it was actually your guys' tool that we used. And so that was pretty cool. Got a lot of help from Darren, one of the owners of GK Technologies. And that
What year would that have been? Or like what years would you have been using ADMS?
Like 2008 through 2013, 2014, something like that.
Oh, goodness. So that's like, because you jumped into using ADMS again here just a few years ago.
Uh-huh.
And you kind of had a little bit of a hiatus from it when you were off doing something different in your career. Mm-hmm. So you must have seen a lot of changes.
Probably one of the biggest changes I immediately saw. So all the functionality was the same, but here are the big differences I noticed right away from using it for 5 years prior and then skipping 10 years and then starting up using it again. The big one was downloading imagery. So I would have to go to all the individual sources of data for GIS data, which wasn't really that big of a deal to me at the time because that was all my formal education was, the USGS data portals, where you find like Landsat tiles and where you're getting other types of shapefile information, like all your roads, county, common land units, all that. That was, I guess, ingrained in part of the education I got. So it's like, oh, okay. So this is just what we got to do. And so then you're just downloading that stuff for your trade area. And at that time, the Landsat images, you would get, like, if you're lucky, one or maybe two that were cloud free and you had what you needed for, making a zone map out of that. But you had to manually download all those tiles, store them in the correct file folder structure so that you can get the correct extraction method to pull that out. And then you fast forward, 10 years into the future, and I get to see what's in this tool. And they're like, oh no, we have servers that we have a person that goes and pulls all that imagery already, make sure that they're the good images, puts them in a nice little tool now that you can just start clicking through the years, seeing a preview of the photo. You go, yep, this is what I want. And then start click, 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 and start. I'm telling you, it took something that took hours to something that takes maybe like 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah,
at the most.
I remember that conversation when you were going to start using ADMS again. And I'm like, nah, we just need to get you into the servers and show you where all the data is. And you were like, what? We don't have to do that anymore. It was pretty fun.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool realization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. So, okay. So you guys are both back doing independent crop consulting now. Precision agriculture has become a part of your businesses. Um, what how are you, Jason, how are you using precision agriculture today, or what has been your gateway to get into it? Where do you see it fit? What do you think of the whole thing? How is it working with your business?
So it's primarily started with you. It can be either goes two ways. There's just fields that you as a consultant are on, and you see how your farmer runs their business, and you approach them and just say, I know there's a benefit here, and here's what we need to look at long term. And you also have farmers that they're picking up that other farmers are doing it, their neighbors, or they're reading about it, and they want to utilize their piece of equipment, or they want to try something different because they know that they've farmed this piece of ground from their whole career and they know there's differences. So that's probably the main reason that it's moved along. And then it's going through the process of probably explaining. Everybody wants. We're so used to now. I can get on my phone and I can go Google search this. I can bring this up. I can find out all this information. So you just expect some of the stuff is just going to happen just that fast too. And there's some conversations you have to have, and then you have to find out, as I had to find out, there's the agronomist's perception of what you think you can do, and then there's the reality of what will happen, you know, and in between there is where things make a difference. So I have some growers that they just make prescriptions for anhydrous. I have some that make prescriptions, or that we zone sample and prescriptions are made, and it's for spreading. We just do phosphate on some fields. I've got some people that are trying a little bit of seeding rate differences. And so far, it's been what I like is my guys are kind of stepping into it. I had one client that just decided this last fall, I'm doing all the land I own. Let's go do this. And so now we're going to sit down this fall. He's got me access to some of his information so we can have more of a conversation. And what that'll be is primarily managing around a lot of their soil types and what they've got. So that's probably the most interesting thing as an agronomist, is that you know there's differences, but this helps you quantify them. And I had a field this last year. It was a 4. Let's see, what did we sample? We sampled 4 out of 5 zones in the field, and the areas that are notorious for high salts, high fertility, we were at a 5% organic matter, and my next zone dropped to a 4 point something, and my next zone was a 3 point something, and my last one was a 2 point something. So it was almost literally a percent difference in organic matter in these 4 zones. So then you immediately think about water holding capacity, and that blue zone was you could hardly, I was surprised I got as good a sample out of as I did, because you put 4 boards around it, you got a hell of a sandbox. You know what I mean? So, and so it's the water holding capacity, you don't have the yield potential there, and all those 4 things all I could think about was my sulfentrazone rate, my metribuzin rate when this is field peas or it's soybeans. So your gears start turning, and yeah, you get excited about soil sampling, which I know for some people that's probably an oxymoron. That's not, you can't say that. You can't say that in the same sentence, but we do on this podcast, don't we?
I
Yes.
Is there anybody here that doesn't get a little bit excited about soil sampling for the 4 people that are here? I love it myself.
Being on a piece of ground, you kind of get it like you're as a farmer, you plant it, you harvest it, you know where the good and bad spots are. But then when you go into the soil sample and a good zone map, it's amazing. It's just like, oh yeah, this is why this doesn't yield anything at the end of the year, or like this is why my weedy spots are here. It's kind of like putting the whole picture together, going in and soil sampling on a zone basis. It's really fun.
Not that there aren't some frustrating days with soil sampling out there. And for that, I would refer this audience to go and listen to the Agronomist Happy Hour podcast about the holy pokers. I'll just leave that right there. It's really a fun podcast.
You have to make it fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I'll just put in here is so much land is based, I think, when it sells on where it's located. People kind of know the lay of it, but after you get done soil sampling it, I don't know if I'd buy a piece of land unless I had that information, because you'll see it, it'll come across on an online auction. It's got all these production zones. That's like, so I would rather, it's got your production index or whatever. I would rather actually give me a 5-zone on that and some results off that in a couple years. That's better information than anything I've ever seen on land being sold online, in my opinion.
I do want to back this conversation up just a little bit, and Kyle and Jason and Jody and everyone jump in on this. But Jason, you said something that was kind of interesting, because you're kind of relatively new to incorporating precision agriculture, modern day here into your agronomy program. And one of the things that I know we worked on was learning the process, right? And you said something just a little bit ago about what you want to do as an agronomist versus what you actually can do. And I think it's important to remember that when we're dealing with precision agriculture, we have some constraints that we need to remember to be well-rounded in 3 different areas. You need to have access or some knowledge about how the software works so that we can write good prescriptions in the software. You need to have good agronomy knowledge about understanding why you're varying the rates, because if you're varying the rates with no agronomic justification behind it, there's really no purpose in having a variable rate program. But you also need to understand how it works in the equipment and what it takes to get the prescription into the equipment and working, and what your parameters and restrictions are within that equipment. You really need to have that understanding of all 3 of those things.
That brings us to the end of part 1 of our interview with Agronomist Happy Hours, Jason Hansen and Kyle Oakey. Catch us in the next part of this interview to dig deeper into how Jason and Kyle utilize precision agriculture as independent crop consultants. With GK Technology, we have a map and an app for that.
Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode, and we'll see you next time on Ag Geek Speak.
And I can't wait to get in the fields again. No, I can't wait to get in the fields again.
Let the geeks at GK Technology help you with your agricultural data. Their agronomists know agriculture. When it comes to creating soils and zone maps to maximize yields in your fields, you can trust the people with decades of experience in site-specific agriculture. Everyone at GK Technology has a background in agriculture, so they know what makes a farm run, and they speak your language. The geeks at GK Technology have a map and an app for that.